Today we're going to talk through workforce planning with a perspective on how companies may be considering adding AI into their workforce plans for the future, what the impact that has on overall headcount, and how I think these decisions are going to be made. And the reason that I decided to do this video in particular is two reasons. The first one is I think this is a very interesting subject area. It's going to impact the future workforce, and I think we need to be aware of how these decisions are getting made and really what to expect for the future. I think the second one is really focused on a small section of my audience, which is recruiters. And what I'd like to show here is the impact that I think this is going to have on the recruiting industry as a whole, both in the automation of a lot of the recruiting activity that currently takes place, but also the more broader impact of what does this then mean when fewer roles need to be hired for, at least in the short term, until those roles are kind of replaced with new things related to the maintenance and management and updates of those systems that are going to come into play. So hope you find this helpful. I'm going to dig straight in. You'll be able to find this workbook in the comment section. Please feel free to have a play around with it. I set this up to be a sample company that would potentially be going through this kind of analysis. Obviously, there's a lot more work that needs to be done here, but this is just a very quick way to demonstrate how these decisions generally get made in this kind of context. So the first thing I want to do is look at the overall headcount for this imaginary organization. So I picked a large company, probably in the Fortune 500, over 20,000 employees, and looked at the typical salary and spend. And when you think about the overall kind of cost of the business, generally the cost of the headcount makes up a very significant portion. And that's why this topic has become quite a hot topic of late, as companies are looking for ways to reduce overall cost that thus increase their profit margin and increase their returns to their shareholders and investors. And so this is kind of the quick overview, really showing how a typical company may be broken down. But let's dig into one team in particular. Let's dig into the HR team. So if you look at the HR team, let's assume that in this large 20,000 plus person company, there's a HR team of around 500 people. There are many different roles in HR, but I do want to drill down into one in particular, the recruiter role. So maybe this company has 150 recruiters designed to support, grow, backfill those positions for this entire organization. And I'm sure they're going to be split globally if this is a typical kind of large corporation. So let's actually get down and drill down into the individual recruiter. So what we want to do, if we're thinking about the impact of AI on an individual's job, is start to look at the task breakdown for that job. This is something that's been around for decades. It's a core part of IO psychology, or kind of the initial stages of doing any kind of workforce planning or analysis. You actually want to see what happens on a day-to-day basis with an individual in that role to try and understand how long does it take to accomplish a task, and how many tasks can that person complete over the course of a week. It's become a little bit more complicated with more white-collar workforce and more kind of creative knowledge-based tasks. But I think the overall concept is still useful for this example. So for a recruiter, think about how they spend their week: sourcing, screening, interviewing, actually conducting the interviews themselves, some admin tasks related to reporting, and then there's probably kind of meetings and training and other things that are not directly related to their work, but are still important when thinking about how things get done in a big company. But what we can start to do then is look at this overall kind of typical weekly breakdown and try and figure out what kind of percentage of these tasks can be accomplished by AI. Now, we know we're never going to completely replace humans with AI, but there are opportunities to enhance productivity within each of these areas. And so if you think about this kind of ideal state of where you have additional tools such as AI sourcing tools or resume screeners that can help you do your job more effectively, how much of the role actually goes away then, and then what is the ultimate impact? So you can see here we've made some kind of very rough assumptions of how much of that role you might want to defer to AI. So with things like screening resumes, where essentially all you're doing is looking through a resume and trying to figure out if that individual matches what you're looking for within the job description, actually 90% of that can probably be done through automation. Same with interview coordination and a lot of the admin tasks. Many applicant tracking systems and HR systems can actually now create these reports in the tool itself. So there's less requirement for you to actually pull data out, put them in a spreadsheet, run analysis yourself, and then kind of share that out. So we're kind of moving to this more automated focus, and AI is definitely helping us to get there. But what happens to the overall recruiter's week when we start to think about the automation? Well, if we're automating away 80% of sourcing candidates, actually that 12 hours a week that a recruiter would normally spend doing that task now becomes 2.5 hours. And you can see how if you play this out over the course of all of the different tasks, you actually get the kind of new time taken to conduct a typical recruiter week is now 13 hours instead of 40 hours. So you're tripling the productivity of each recruiter. And if you look at a lot of the copy for many of the tools that are out there, these are the kind of efficiency gains that they're promising. and you triple overall output. So that's very good. But what does that then mean for the overall team size? Well, if we go back to the HR team and I unhide this section here, you can see that if we're thinking about an AI leverage of 3.08, this is the exact calculation, instead of 150 heads, well, we actually only need now 50 recruiters. And so this is rounded up from essentially just dividing the headcount by the efficiency gain. And if each recruiter is doing 3 times as much work, you need a third of the recruiters. And so thinking about this from a business context, whereas you historically had spent $10.5 million on your recruiting team, now you're spending $3.5 million. And so this is a $7 million saving. Now, the cost of these AI tools are only going to be a fraction of that, less than 10%. I'd say more closer to kind of 1 or 2%. When you think about the overall cost of integrating all these and maintaining them. So all of a sudden, with that one exercise, you found $7 million in annual savings on the headcount. And we know that headcount also includes benefits, onboarding, hiring, all those kind of activities. And so you can quickly see how the business case can be made for replacing a lot of activity with AI and then actually reducing the overall team size over the long term. What happens then when we go back and look at this over the whole organization? So we've made a very rough assumption here, which is that if you add AI to everyone's role, you're going to triple the output. That's probably not actually true, but just for illustration purposes here, what I've done is shown the new headcount and the new spend, given that headcount and spend are very closely linked. So what happens then if you automate 2/3 of all of the activity? You get down from 22,000 heads to closer to 7,000. And the overall spend, you'll see that you're saving over $1 billion in annual headcount spend. This is a huge deal for companies, especially those that are maybe struggling to make ends meet in a world of inflation and maybe tariffs and everything else that are coming. So it's a very interesting kind of approach. But when we start to then look at the overall impact to the business, if we think this business is maybe earning around $12 billion a year in revenue, and if you add the non-headcount cost to that, so the cost of manufacturing the goods or whatever that you're selling, the service cost, or this is a generic business, so we can't really drill too deeply into this, but the pre-AI profit, so if the company is currently making just under $2 billion a year off $12 billion in revenue, that margin is 60%. It's just very simple calculations. Now, if you do this headcount reduction exercise by incorporating AI, all of a sudden your new post-AI profit is $3 billion. So you've added back that cost of that headcount saving. But what that does to your profit margin is quite substantial. So you're increasing your margin from 16% to 25% and outperforming your peers, which is really the goal of most executive teams in large corporations. And so you can very quickly see here how a case can be made for automating away a lot of the tasks that individuals are doing and really across the whole organization. And these numbers are probably not going to play out exactly. You've got to think about what does it actually cost to procure these systems and then maintain them and then train people on how to use them. But I think the key takeaway I want you to have from this is that there is a very strong business case, and it's not fractions of a percentage point. These are huge leaps in overall profitability for companies. And so I think these changes are really coming. And if I could leave you with, I think, 3 thoughts, really. The first one is this is a very simplistic analysis. And so we're kind of going in, we're making some very broad-based assumptions that AI is going to change this. It's not going to change it immediately. And there's a lot of nuance in this. There's obviously a lot more work to do to actually go through every task that everyone in the organization carries out and then try and figure out how do you actually replace that. I actually think that's going to come bottoms up rather than top down, as each individual is going to be encouraged to think about ways that they can do their job more effectively by incorporating AI. So maybe they start using ChatGPT as part of their kind of daily reporting and analysis. Maybe there's another tool that they use to analyze financial spreadsheets and actually get insight very quickly. But this is the train that most companies are already on with automation, and AI is just going to accelerate the progress a little bit more. I think the second point I wanted to give as a takeaway is really thinking through what is the overall impact then to the recruiting function as a whole. Now, we saw if we actually just focus on the recruiter task and automate as much as possible within that space, potentially you could 3x the productivity of each recruiter. And so you need a third of the recruiters that you would normally. In this case, we went from a team of 150 down to 50. Now, each of those recruiters is going to have to be more highly trained and skilled in actually operating these tools and understanding the data and the insights that they're getting out. But nevertheless, there are fewer overall positions there. But what this doesn't account for is the overall impact of the whole corporation reducing the headcount and the reduced number of backfills that are actually going to come from that. And so all of a sudden you've gone from 22,000, maybe you're filling 4,000 roles a year, to 7,000 where you're only filling maybe 1,500 roles a year. And all of a sudden, you don't just need fewer recruiters because each recruiter is able to do more. You actually need fewer recruiters because there's less work to go around. And that kind of reads across the whole organization. So there's this whole iterative loop of, well, what happens when you change one thing? because it's going to impact everything else. And so it's something to bear in mind. But the takeaway, if you're in this position where you're thinking about what might happen to your role, is really think about how can you actually use these tools in order to enhance your own productivity and become more effective in the role. And I'd say the final thing, the big takeaway for me here is this is looking at the existing process that everyone follows and trying to think, how do we do this with automation? I think there's a huge opportunity here where instead of thinking about automating existing tasks, actually start to look at whether the tasks that we're doing are the right ones and actually completely redesign the way that work happens. And so we may think about the kind of overall end-to-end process of achieving the business goals, and then from the ground up, start to think about what's the best way to accomplish that, instead of just thinking about individuals in roles and automating the tasks. That's really the big takeaway. Excited to hear what everyone thinks and hope to see your comments in the chat below. Thank you very much.